Howdy Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We do all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segment. And this topic actually comes to us from a viewer. Adam has requested a video on the great Lamps of Arda. So that's what we're going to talk about. The lamps are primarily mentioned in the Silmarillion. And I realize that's not Lord of the Rings. However, I will show that there is a tie-in between the events that caused the destruction of the lamps and the Lord of the Rings. Just for those of you who don't necessarily know what the Silmarillion's all about, maybe you've watched the movies or just read Lord of the Rings. Silmarillion is essentially Tolkien's version of a Bible for Middle-earth. It's a creation myth. And so his version of God is Eru. And Eru creates these angels. They're called the Ainur. And together they sing these songs and they create Arda. Arda is like a giant continent. Think of it as like Pangea, basically, right? So it's before everything broke off. It's just one massive landmass. And to light Arda, they created these massive lamps, 2 of them. So there's a lamp in the north, Illuin, a lamp in the south, Ormal, and where the light meets. So in other words, like if you did a Venn diagram of the light source, in the middle where they overlap, that's where the Ainur live. So these angels all live on an island called Almarin, where it's pretty much always lit by these lamps. It's a beautiful paradise. And at this point in the creation myth, sentient beings haven't been created yet. You know, things, elves and men haven't shown up yet. But other types of fauna and certainly flora exist. And so that's where we've got this kind of a pastoral paradise that the Valar live in. And there is, of course, in any creation myth, you've got the source of evil. So in this case, it's Melkor. Melkor would be the version of Satan. He is basically the most powerful of the Ainur, of the angels, and gets jealous of Eru and decides he's going to try to corrupt everything that Eru and the Ainur do. So when these lamps are made, that seems like a good target for him. He actually has spies that are serving him that are still technically part of the Ainur that live in Almarin. He doesn't live there, but he has his spies that do. One of his most important spies is Sauron. So Sauron is not one of the Valar. He's not one of the top angels, if you want to call him that. He's in a lower ring. He's a Maiar spirit, so he's kind of a lesser angel. But at that point, he is doing some spying work for Melkor and informing him about basically the weaknesses of the Ainur. He basically gives Melkor a good idea of when it would be best to strike. Melkor and his followers attack and they knock down these lamps. They come crashing down. They're huge, huge pillars. And when they crash, they just cause tremendous damage to Arda. And in fact, break Arda into 3 continents. It's just a massive devastation that happens. And of course, the lights go out and the world is back in darkness. And the Ainur retreat to as far west as they can go. And so they go to the westernmost continent of Aman, and they build up their own little new country of Valinor. And they're still worried about Melkor coming to attack them, so they build these big cliffs, basically, that surround their country. And the cliffs are called the Pelori. But they're trying to make walls to protect them from Melkor. I should note, kind of interesting, Christopher Tolkien mentions that Tolkien's original version of the destruction of the lamps was different than Melkor simply coming in and destroying them. So in this original version, the Ainur are trying to make amends with Melkor. So he's on the outs with them. He's still trying to corrupt everything they do. And they're like, hey, we could use your help. And Melkor pretends to help them, basically, pretends to relent. Like, okay, what do you need? Like, well, we're trying to build these 2 lamps to light Arda. And so Melkor's like, you know what? Perfect. I got the perfect thing, that's perfect substance to build these lamps out of. It's a hard substance. It's going to be great. It's called ice. Now, the Ainur never heard of ice before. They don't know what it is. They realize, oh yeah, it looks like it works pretty well. And so they craft the lamp posts out of ice. Now, obviously, when the lamps get lit, they warm up, the ice melts, kabloosh, everything gets destroyed. But in this case, now you've got reasons for the seas and stuff because the melted ice creates, oceans and lakes and such. But yeah, that was one of the original ones, was that it's a trick. Melkor tricks them into making the lamps out of ice because he's horrible. He's a horrible person. Anyway, but that got scrapped in later writings where Tolkien basically made it more of an assault. So, after the lamps are destroyed and the Ainur flee, there comes a time, so as I mentioned, the world is dark. It's only lit by starlight at this point. Over in the west, the Ainur create 2 trees that they use to light Valinor, or kind of light their area. But the rest of Middle-earth is still under twilight. So the only things really roaming around at this point are these kind of roving bands. Melkor's monsters it's a dangerous time to be wandering around in Middle-earth. So Yavanna, worried about the flora and fauna that she's created, she creates Yavanna is one of the Valar. She's one of the highest angels. And I've mentioned her actually. She was the one who later years recommended that Radagast come to Middle-earth to help fight Sauron. So remember, so we've already mentioned Sauron in this case. So flash forward thousands of years, Yavanna remembers Sauron, and she also remembers her flora and fauna that she's particularly cognizant of. And so she's the one that sends Radagast to help protect the flora and fauna of Middle-earth from Sauron. Anyway, in this case, she creates what they call the Sleep of Yavanna. So under all this twilight, dark place where Melkor is running rampage, everything goes into hibernation. Basically, nothing ages. Everything is quiet and waiting for the next step of creation, essentially, from Eru. Now, during this time, Eru is getting ready to create elves and men. The destruction of the lamps kind of put a lot of this on hold a bit because it wasn't, Melkor did his job in that he was trying to, corrupt stuff, and he did. But Eru's still getting on track. He's going to create elves. In the meantime, there's another angel, another Valar, named Aule. And Aule gets impatient. He wants to get on with creation. And he's essentially, if you were to compare him, let's say, probably like the Roman god Vulcan or the Greek god Hephaestus. They're the gods that have the forges and smiths. He is of that ilk. He's a craftsman and he builds things. Anyway, he decides, I think I can do this creation thing. Spoiler alert, he can't. But he tries. And so what he creates are the dwarves. The dwarves are they're an art project, and so Aule makes 13 dwarves, 6 pairs, male female dwarves, and then 1 lone dwarf Durin, very important, that later, many thousands of years later, Durin is going to essentially begin the city of Khazad-dûm, Moria and such like that. But for now, there's 13 dwarves. Here's what's interesting. He doesn't have a blueprint, so that's kind of the reason that they're a little shorter than most, and a little, they don't look the part, and they don't actually have what we'd call true sentience, consciousness. So as long as Aule is controlling, let's say, a particular dwarf, if he's controlling Durin can walk around and move around. But as soon as Aule takes his attention away, Durin would just stop, and he's like a zombie robot, essentially. He created a series of zombie robot dwarves. And so he realizes this, I made a botch of this. And he talks to Eru, and he basically apologizes, like, I'm sorry I was so impatient. I'm just going to destroy this project of mine, this experiment. And so he's going to just bash these 13 dwarves with a hammer and just take them out. And Eru says, hang on now. You got a good start here. I'll adopt these, and let's see if I can, start, instead of starting from scratch, I'm going to start from your blueprint, and we're gonna work with this. We'll work with what you started. And so, hence, Eru adopts the dwarves, and because Eru is the only one who's got the ability to create life. He has the secret fire, otherwise known as the flame imperishable. What you might have heard is, remember when Gandalf in Fellowship of the Ring is on the bridge at Khazad-dûm, he's confronting Durin's Bane, the Balrog. He says to the Balrog, I am a servant of the secret fire. Well, that secret fire, what he's talking about is Eru. He's a servant of Eru, who wields the secret fire, which is the fire of creation. So, by imbuing the dwarves with that fire of creation, that's what ends up becoming what we know as dwarves. He still puts them to sleep as well until they can be awakened later. But he keeps them from being destroyed, essentially, by Aule. So there you've got the lamps. They were destroyed. They just rent the earth in 3 different parts. We'll talk more about the trees later. I'll do a video about the trees of Valar, because those are very interesting as well. And Melkor had something to say about the destruction of those as well. But you can imagine the whole world in darkness. And at this time, actually, eventually, the elves were created and lived under twilight for many years before the sun and the moon were created. So, yeah, there you go. Those are the lamps, and basically more about what happened after the fall of the lamps. But, so if you've got any topics you would like to hear about, feel free to pass them along. Be happy to talk about a topic of your choice. And feel free to subscribe. We will talk to you guys next time. Bye now.